It was just another drizzly evening in downtown Seattle, the kind where most people hurry home to their warm beds and hot dinners. For Mike Taylor, though, closing time at his small auto repair shop was still 2 hours away. He'd been working since dawn, his hands stained with grease, fixing everything from old pickup trucks to family minivans. The neon "Open" sign flickered in his shop window, casting a red glow on the wet pavement outside. Mike was underneath a Honda Civic, trying to diagnose a strange rattling noise when he heard the distinctive whine of an expensive engine followed by an unusual popping sound. Sliding out from under the car, he walked to his shop's entrance and spotted a sleek Tesla Model S pulled over on the opposite side of the street. Even through the rain, he could see smoke wisping from under its hood. The car stuck out like a sore thumb in this working-class neighborhood, where most vehicles were at least a decade old. The driver had stepped out, looking completely lost. He was wearing what Mike guessed was a suit worth more than his monthly rent, now getting soaked in the Seattle rain. The man kept looking at his phone, probably trying to figure out who to call, while pacing back and forth next to his car. Mike could have easily pretended not to notice. After all, he'd been working for 14 hours straight. His back was aching, and luxury car owners usually had their own exclusive mechanics on speed dial. Plus, these high-end electric vehicles were basically rolling computers, way different from the traditional cars he usually worked on. But something about the scene tugged at his conscience. Maybe it was how helpless the guy looked, or maybe it was just the way his mother had raised him. Always help others when you can, she'd say. Grabbing his umbrella and basic toolkit, Mike locked up his shop and jogged across the street. As he got closer, he could see the man was probably in his 40s, with worried lines creasing his forehead as he stared at his phone. Having some trouble, Mike called out, raising his voice over the sound of rain hitting the pavement. The man looked up, relief washing over his face. Oh, thank goodness. Yes, everything just died. There was this weird noise, and then smoke, and now nothing's working. I've got a crucial meeting across town in 30 minutes, and my usual service center isn't answering. Mike nodded, already moving toward the front of the car. Mind if I take a look? I'm a mechanic from across the street. I mainly work on regular cars, but I've dealt with a few Teslas before. The man gestured helplessly at the car. Please be my guest. I'm Tom, by the way. Tom Chen. As Mike popped the hood, he could feel Tom hovering nervously behind him. The smoke was coming from a blown coolant line, not a complicated fix, but definitely not something that would resolve itself. The sophisticated car had automatically shut down to prevent further damage. Rain dripped down Mike's neck as he assessed the situation. He could fix this in about 20 minutes with the right parts, which he luckily had back in his shop. It wouldn't be a permanent solution, but it would get Tom to his meeting and safely to his regular mechanic the next day. What happened next would set in motion a chain of events that would completely transform Mike's life, though he had no way of knowing it at the time. His simple decision to help a stranger in the rain was about to open doors he never even knew existed. The rain kept falling as Mike jogged back to his shop, his boots splashing through puddles. Inside, he quickly grabbed the parts he needed and rushed back to Tom's stranded Tesla. The wealthy businessman was still standing there, looking increasingly anxious as he checked his watch every few seconds. Won't take too long, Mike assured him, already getting to work. Despite his exhaustion, his hands moved with the confidence that comes from years of experience. The cool rain trickled down his back as he leaned under the hood, but he barely noticed it anymore. Tom tried making small talk while Mike worked. You own that shop across the street? Not exactly, Mike replied, carefully fitting the new coolant line. I'm the head mechanic, been there about 8 years now. Started right after high school, actually. He didn't mention how he'd been saving every spare penny, dreaming of opening his own place someday. 8 years? You must really know your stuff then, Tom said, sounding impressed. Mike just shrugged, focusing on the task at hand. He'd learned early on that actions speak louder than words, especially in his line of work. The expensive car's engine compartment was illuminated by his trusty work light, casting shadows as he methodically went about the repair. What brings you to this part of town? Mike asked, mainly to keep Tom's mind off his delayed meeting. Don't see too many Teslas around here. Tom sighed, running a hand through his rain-dampened hair. I was trying to take a shortcut to avoid traffic on the highway. Clearly, that worked out great. He attempted a laugh, but the worry in his voice was clear. As Mike worked, he explained what he was doing in simple terms, helping Tom understand the issue. Most customers appreciated knowing what was happening with their vehicles, regardless of how expensive those vehicles might be. The coolant line burst, but I'm putting in a new one. It's not the fancy original part, but it'll definitely get you to your meeting and hold up until you can get to your regular service center tomorrow. 20 minutes later, Mike closed the hood with a satisfying click. "Give it a try now," he said, wiping his hands on his work rag. Tom slid into the driver's seat and pressed the start button. The Tesla hummed to life normally. All warning lights cleared. The relief on his face was immediate and obvious. "You're a lifesaver," Tom exclaimed, jumping out of the car. He reached for his wallet. "How much do I owe you? And please, don't give me a discount. You just saved me from missing a crucial meeting." Mike held up his hands, shaking his head. "Don't worry about it." "I insist," Tom pressed, already pulling out several $100 bills. "Really, it's fine," Mike said firmly. "Just pass on the favor someday when you see someone else who needs help." Tom stared at him for a long moment, clearly surprised. In his world, everything had a price tag. "I don't understand." "Why?" Mike thought about how to explain it. "You know that feeling you get when someone helps you out of a tough spot? That's payment enough for me. Plus, my mom always taught me that kindness comes back around eventually." Tom slowly put his wallet away, still looking somewhat bewildered. "At least take my business card. If you ever need anything, and I mean anything, please call me." Mike accepted the card mostly to be polite, tucking it into his pocket without really looking at it. He'd learned over the years that rich people often made grand offers in the moment, but those promises usually evaporated by morning. "Drive safe," Mike said, already turning to head back to his shop. "And stick to the main roads next time." "Wait," Tom called after him. "I never got your name." "Mike Taylor." "Well, Mike Taylor, thank you, really." There was something intense in Tom's expression, something Mike couldn't quite read. As Mike watched the Tesla drive away, he had no idea that this simple act of kindness would completely change his life. He was just thinking about the Honda Civic waiting in his shop and maybe grabbing some hot coffee to warm up. What he didn't know was that Tom Chen wasn't just any wealthy businessman. And the next morning, when Mike dragged himself out of bed for another long day at the shop, he'd find something on his doorstep that would make him question everything he thought he knew about how the world worked. But for now, Mike just locked up his shop, his boots squeaking on the wet floor as he did his final checks. The rain had finally stopped and the streets were quiet. He was looking forward to getting home, having a hot shower, and falling into bed. Sometimes the simplest moments in life, helping a stranger, doing your job well, heading home after a long day, those were the moments that mattered most. Little did he know, tomorrow would bring changes he never could have imagined. The next morning started like any other for Mike. His alarm went off at 5:30 a.m., and he dragged himself out of bed, still tired from yesterday's long shift. The sun wasn't even up yet as he made his way to the front door to grab the morning paper. But when he opened the door, he stopped dead in his tracks. There, sitting on his worn welcome mat, was a massive package. Not just any package. This was clearly expensive, with pristine white packaging and gold trim. It looked completely out of place on his shabby front porch. What in the world? Mike muttered to himself, bending down to examine it. The package was about the size of a large briefcase, surprisingly heavy, and had his name printed in elegant letters on top. For a moment, he just stood there in his old t-shirt and sweatpants, trying to make sense of it. He hadn't ordered anything, and his birthday wasn't for months. Then he noticed a cream-colored envelope attached to the top. Still confused, Mike carried everything inside and set it on his kitchen table. The envelope contained a handwritten note on thick, expensive paper. "Dear Mike, your kindness last night was something rare in today's world. Most people would have kept walking, especially after a long day of work. But you didn't just help. You refused payment and asked only that I help someone else in return. I believe actions like yours deserve recognition. Inside this package is a top-of-the-line laptop with specialized automotive diagnostic software. It's the same system we use at our Tesla service centers. I hope it helps you continue your excellent work. But this isn't just a thank you gift. I have a proposition for you. my assistant will stop by your shop today at 2 p.m. I hope you'll hear what I have to say. Tom Chen, CEO, Chen Technologies. Mike's coffee cup froze halfway to his mouth. CEO? He quickly pulled out the business card from his pocket, the one he hadn't bothered to look at last night. Sure enough, there it was in silver lettering. Thomas Chen, Chief Executive Officer, Chen Technologies. His hands slightly shaking now, Mike carefully opened the package. Inside was a sleek laptop that probably cost more than he made in 3 months. There was also a folder containing software licenses, user manuals, and what looked like certification course materials. This can't be real, he whispered to himself. But it was very real, sitting right there on his scratched kitchen table between his half-empty coffee cup and yesterday's mail. Mike spent the next hour just staring at everything, trying to process it all. He'd helped plenty of people before. It was just what you did, right? But nobody had ever responded like this. He called his mom, needing to tell someone. "Mom, you're not going to believe what just happened." She listened to the whole story, then chuckled softly. "You know what this reminds me of? That story your grandpa used to tell about helping that stranded family during the big storm and how they turned out to be." "Mom," Mike interrupted, glancing at the clock. "I've got to get to work, but what do you think about all this?" He could hear the smile in her voice. "I think sometimes life has bigger plans for us than we imagine. Just be yourself. That's what got you here in the first place." At work, Mike could barely focus. He kept checking the clock, watching it crawl toward 2 p.m. The morning passed in a blur of oil changes and tire rotations, his mind constantly wandering to what this proposition might be. Around 1:30, he decided to clean himself up a bit. He washed the grease off his hands and face and put on his cleanest work shirt. Whatever was coming, he wanted to at least look somewhat professional. At exactly 2 p.m., a black luxury SUV pulled up outside the shop. A woman in a crisp business suit stepped out, carrying a leather portfolio. She looked around the modest repair shop with an unreadable expression. Mike's heart was pounding as she approached. What could the CEO of a major tech company possibly want with a small-time mechanic like him? Was this about to change everything, or was it too good to be true? The woman's heels clicked on the concrete floor as she walked towards him. "Mr. Taylor. I'm Lisa Wan, Mr. Chen's executive assistant. Thank you for making time to see me today." Mike wiped his palms on his pants, trying to calm his nerves. "Just Mike is fine. And thanks for coming by." She smiled, and it was warmer than he expected. "Mr. Chen has an unusual opportunity he'd like to discuss with you. Would you be willing to come to our offices tomorrow morning?" As Mike stood there in his small repair shop, surrounded by the familiar smells of oil and rubber, he had no idea he was about to step into a completely different world. Sometimes life's biggest changes come from the smallest acts of kindness, like helping a stranger on a rainy night. The next morning, Mike found himself standing in front of the Chen Technologies building, feeling completely out of place. The towering glass structure seemed to touch the sky, and his reflection in the polished windows showed just how much he didn't belong, wearing his nicest clothes, which meant his only dress shirt, slightly wrinkled, and the suit he bought 3 years ago for his cousin's wedding. Taking a deep breath, he pushed through the revolving doors into a lobby that looked more like a modern art museum than an office. His work boots squeaked against the marble floor as he approached the reception desk. "I'm here to see Mr. Chen," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm Mike Taylor." The receptionist's eyes lit up with recognition. "Ah yes, Mr. Taylor. We've been expecting you. Please take the express elevator to the 47th floor." The elevator ride gave Mike time to think, maybe too much time. What was he doing here? He belonged in a repair shop, not a corporate office. His hands, despite scrubbing them raw this morning, still had traces of grease in the creases. The elevator doors opened directly into what had to be Tom Chen's office suite. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city, making Mike's knees feel weak. He'd never been this high up before. "Mike, good morning." Tom's voice boomed across the room. He looked different in his element, confident, powerful, but with the same genuine smile from that rainy night. "Please, come sit. Coffee?" Before Mike could answer, Lisa appeared with 2 steaming cups and a plate of pastries. The coffee cup probably cost more than his entire coffee maker at home. "So, Tom began, settling into his chair. I imagine you're wondering why I asked you here. Mike nodded, carefully holding his coffee cup. Yes, sir. And thank you for the laptop. It's incredible, but it's too much. Tom waved his hand dismissively. That's nothing compared to what I'm about to propose. He leaned forward, his expression becoming serious. Mike, what do you know about our company's community initiatives? Not much, Mike admitted honestly. I fix cars, sir. I'm not really up on corporate news. Tom smiled. Well, we're about to launch something new, something that could change lives. He pressed a button, and a screen descended from the ceiling, showing images of young people working on cars. We're starting a foundation focused on automotive education for underprivileged youth, teaching them real skills, giving them a future. Mike's interest was genuinely piqued now. This was something he understood, something he cared about. The thing is, Tom continued, we need someone to lead it. Someone who knows cars inside and out, someone who understands the value of hard work, and most importantly, someone with real integrity. He paused meaningfully. Someone like you. Mike nearly choked on his coffee. Me? But I'm just a mechanic. No, Tom said firmly. You're much more than that. You're someone who stops to help others even when you're exhausted. Someone who refuses payment for doing the right thing. Someone who knows what it's like to work your way up from nothing. He slid a folder across the desk. This position comes with a substantial salary, full benefits, and most importantly, the resources to build something meaningful. You'd have the freedom to design the program, choose the students, and even set up your own training facility. Mike's head was spinning. This had to be a dream. But I don't have any experience running something like this. I've never even managed a shop. Experience can be learned. Character can't. Tom stood up and walked to the window. You know what really impressed me that night? Not just that you helped me, but how you did it. You explained everything clearly, made me feel at ease, treated me like a person rather than a wealthy client. That's exactly what these kids need. Mike stared at the folder in front of him, his thoughts racing. This was the opportunity of a lifetime, but it was also terrifying. He'd be leaving everything he knew, stepping into a world he barely understood. I need time to think about it, he managed to say. Tom nodded approvingly. I'd be worried if you didn't. Take the weekend, look through the proposal, talk to your family. But Mike, he waited until Mike met his eyes. Don't let fear of the unknown stop you from doing something extraordinary. As Mike rode the elevator back down, his mind was already racing with possibilities. He thought about all the young people he'd met who had talent but no opportunities, about how different his own life might have been if someone had given him a chance like this. The folder in his hands felt heavy with possibility. Inside were details about salary, more money than he'd ever imagined making, benefits and program outlines. But what really caught his eye were the blank pages at the back, labeled Vision and Implementation Plan. They were asking him not just to run this program, but to shape it, to build something that could change lives. Walking back to his car, Mike pulled out his phone to call his mom. He needed her wisdom now more than ever. As he waited for her to answer, he watched the morning sun reflect off the glass building behind him, turning it into a beacon of light. Sometimes life's biggest opportunities come disguised as simple moments, like helping a stranger on a rainy night. Now Mike just had to decide if he was brave enough to seize his. The weekend felt like the longest of Mike's life. He spent hours at his small kitchen table, papers spread out everywhere, trying to make sense of this opportunity that had fallen into his lap. The proposal folder from Chen Technologies was worn at the edges now from how many times he'd opened and closed it. His tiny apartment, which had always felt cozy enough before, now seemed to close in around him as he paced back and forth. The steady drip of his leaky faucet kept time with his thoughts as he weighed every angle. Saturday morning, he drove to his mom's house for breakfast, a tradition they'd kept since he'd moved out years ago. The smell of pancakes and coffee filled her small kitchen, just like it had throughout his childhood. "You're quieter than usual," his mom said, sliding a plate in front of him. She sat down across the table, her kind eyes studying his face. "Still thinking about that offer?" Mike pushed his pancakes around with his fork. "I don't know if I can do it, Mom. Running a whole foundation, that's not me. I fix cars, that's what I know." His mom reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Remember when you were 16 and that old Ford truck came into the shop? The one everyone else had given up on. Mike couldn't help but smile at the memory. Yeah, my boss said it was hopeless. But you stayed late every night for 2 weeks, learning everything you could about that model, trying different approaches. You didn't know how to fix it at first, but you figured it out. This is different, Mike protested. We're talking about people's futures here, not just cars. His mom's eyes crinkled with wisdom. Is it really so different? You've always had a way of seeing potential where others don't, in old cars, in the young kids who hang around your shop asking questions. Maybe that's exactly what this program needs. Later that day, Mike drove to his favorite thinking spot, a quiet overlook above the city. The same spot where he'd come years ago when deciding whether to drop out of college to pursue his mechanic's certification instead. He pulled out his phone and looked at the photos he'd taken of the program outline. The salary was incredible, more money than he'd ever dreamed of making. But surprisingly, that wasn't what kept drawing his attention. It was those blank pages labeled Vision and Implementation Plan. As he'd read through them for the 100th time, ideas had started flowing. He thought about the kids who hung around his shop after school, eager to learn but with nowhere to go. He thought about his own journey and how different it might have been with proper guidance and resources. Sunday evening found him in his apartment's small living room, talking it through with his best friend Pete over beers. "You're crazy if you don't take it," Pete said bluntly. "But you're also crazy if you think it'll be easy. You'll be dealing with corporate types now, not just engines." Mike sighed, sinking deeper into his worn couch. "That's what scares me. I don't know anything about that world." "Maybe that's exactly why you'd be good at it," Pete pointed out. "You'll keep it real. Make it about the work, not the politics." As Sunday night turned into Monday morning, Mike lay awake in bed, staring at his ceiling. The steady rhythm of the city outside his window provided a backdrop to his thoughts. He thought about his current life, the satisfaction of fixing things, the simplicity of knowing exactly what each day would bring. It was comfortable, safe. Then he thought about the possibility in front of him, the chance to build something bigger than himself, to give others the opportunities he'd wished for when he was younger. His mom's words kept coming back to him. Don't let fear of the unknown stop you from doing something extraordinary. Rolling over, he grabbed his phone and pulled up the photos he'd taken at work last week. There was one of young Tommy, the neighbor kid who spent every Saturday watching Mike work, soaking up everything he could learn. Another showed Lisa, a high school student who'd asked about apprenticeships but couldn't afford the training programs. What if he could create something for kids like them? Not just a training program, but a real pathway to a better future. The more he thought about it, the clearer it became. Yes, he was scared. Yes, there was a good chance he might fail. But if he didn't try, he'd never know what could have been. As dawn began to break over the city, Mike finally made his decision. He reached for his phone, found Tom Chen's number, and began typing a message. His hands were shaking slightly, but his mind was clear. Sometimes the hardest decisions aren't about choosing between good and bad, but between comfortable and extraordinary. As Mike hit send on his message, he knew his life would never be the same. The question was he ready for what came next? The answer, he realized, had been inside him all along, just waiting for the right moment to emerge. "I'll do it." Those 3 words in Mike's early morning text message to Tom Chen set everything in motion. By 9 a.m., he was back in that towering glass building, this time with purpose in his step despite his racing heart. The next few hours passed in a blur of paperwork, handshakes, and discussions about start dates. What struck Mike most was how Tom kept asking for his input, genuinely wanting to hear his ideas. "Remember," Tom said, leaning back in his chair, "this isn't just about following our plan. We want you to build something real, something that works. You know what these kids need better than any of our consultants?" Walking into his old repair shop later that day to give his notice was one of the hardest things Mike had ever done. His boss, Rick, an old-timer who taught him half of what he knew about cars, listened quietly as Mike explained. "Can't say I'm surprised," Rick finally said, removing his grease-stained cap to run a hand through his gray hair. "You've always been meant for bigger things than this place." He paused, then added with a slight smile, "Just don't forget us little guys when you're running your fancy program." The next month was a whirlwind. Mike found himself diving into a world he never knew existed. Meetings with architects about the training facility design, discussions with education experts about curriculum development, and countless sessions with the Chen Technologies legal team about permits and certifications. There were moments when it all felt overwhelming, like when he had to give his first presentation to the board of directors, his hands sweating as he clicked through PowerPoint slides, something he'd had to learn to use just days before. But then there were moments that made it all worth it. Like when he visited local high schools to talk about the program and saw the way kids' eyes lit up at the possibility of a real future in automotive technology. Or when he worked with his team to design hands-on training modules that would actually teach useful skills. Mike insisted on keeping things practical. These kids need to learn by doing, he argued in one planning meeting. We can teach theory, sure, but they need to get their hands dirty too. He drew on everything he'd learned over the years, not just about cars, but about people. He remembered how he'd learned best, what had motivated him, what had held him back. Every experience, every mistake, every triumph became part of the foundation he was building. The program started taking shape. They'd offer both day and evening classes to accommodate different schedules. Students would work with real vehicles, learning everything from basic maintenance to advanced diagnostics. But more than that, they'd learn life skills, problem solving, professionalism, financial management. Mike insisted on including mentorship as a key component. Sometimes kids just need someone to believe in them, he explained to Tom. Someone who sees their potential and pushes them to reach it. One evening, about a week before the program was set to launch, Mike stood alone in the newly completed training facility. The space was impressive, gleaming tools, state-of-the-art diagnostic equipment, and several vehicles ready for students to work on. But it was more than just a fancy garage. It was a place where lives could change. He walked slowly through the workshop, running his hand along a workbench. The smell of new tools and fresh paint mixed with the familiar sense of oil and rubber. This was really happening. His phone buzzed. A text from his mom. "Proud of you, kiddo. Dad would be too." Mike smiled, blinking back unexpected tears. His father had been a mechanic too, though he hadn't lived to see Mike follow in his footsteps. He would have loved this place. The next morning, Mike arrived early to prepare for the first staff meeting. He'd hired a mix of experienced mechanics and teachers, people who shared his vision for what this program could be. As he stood at the front of the room, looking at the eager faces of his team, he felt something shift inside him. The fear and uncertainty of the past month faded, replaced by a quiet confidence. He might not know everything about running a foundation, but he knew about cars, about learning, about second chances. "Welcome everyone," he began, his voice steady and clear. "We're about to do something special here. We're not just teaching kids about cars, we're giving them a future. Let's make it count." The room filled with enthusiastic nods and determined smiles. They were ready. In just a few days, the first group of students would walk through those doors, carrying with them dreams and hopes for a better future. Mike's leap of faith was about to transform not just his life, but countless others. Sometimes the biggest adventures start with the smallest decisions, like helping a stranger on a rainy night. 1 year later, Mike stood at the back of the training facility's main workshop, watching with pride as his first class of students prepared for their graduation ceremony. The space that had once been empty and new was now full of life, bearing the marks of countless hours of learning and hard work. 25 students, dressed in crisp blue uniforms with the program's logo, were putting the final touches on their showcase projects. Each had restored a classic car as their final assignment, turning rusted shells into gleaming masterpieces. The air buzzed with excitement and nervous energy. Mike thought back to that first day, when these same students had walked in, most of them unsure and hesitant. Some had been high school dropouts. Others had been working dead-end jobs, dreaming of something better. All of them had needed a chance, just like the one he'd gotten from Tom Chen. "Hey, Mr. Taylor," called out Danny, one of his brightest students. "Come check this out." The teenager was beaming with pride as he showed off the 1967 Mustang he'd restored. The car gleamed under the workshop lights, its engine purring like new. "Remember when you couldn't even change oil without making a mess?" Mike teased, patting Danny's shoulder. The young man grinned, remembering his first week in the program. "Yeah, and now I've got 3 job offers from top shops in the city," Danny replied. His eyes shone with confidence that hadn't been there a year ago. My mom still can't believe it. The graduation ceremony itself was simple but meaningful. Each student had family and friends in attendance, filling the workshop with proud faces. Tom Chen was there too, sitting quietly in the back, watching his investment in human potential paid off. Mike stepped up to the podium, adjusting his tie nervously. Public speaking had gotten easier over the past year, but it still wasn't his favorite part of the job. When we started this program, he began, looking out at the faces he'd come to know so well, we weren't just teaching automotive skills. We were building futures. Each person here has shown incredible dedication, not just to learning about cars, but to changing their lives. He paused, emotion catching in his throat. Some people think fixing cars is just about engines and parts. But it's really about solving problems, about not giving up when things get tough. These students haven't just learned to fix cars, they've learned to believe in themselves. After the certificates were handed out and the photos were taken, Mike found himself back in his office, looking at the wall of success stories he'd started. Photos of students with their job offers, thank you letters from families, newspaper clippings about the program's impact on the community. His phone buzzed. A text from his mom. Your dad would be doing backflips in heaven seeing this. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. It was Tom Chen. Quite a difference from that rainy night a year ago, Tom said, stepping into the office. Mike nodded. Sometimes I still can't believe all this started because of a broken-down Tesla. No. Tom corrected him. It started because you chose to help someone when you didn't have to. That's what made me realize you were the right person for this. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, Mike walked through the quiet workshop one last time. The restored cars sat silently, waiting for their proud new mechanics to drive them home tomorrow. Tools were neatly arranged, floors swept clean, habits his students had finally mastered. He stopped at the entrance, where a small plaque hung on the wall. It read, "Every great journey begins with a single step." Below it, he'd added his own words. And sometimes that step is just helping someone in need. Tomorrow would bring a new class of students, new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference. But tonight, Mike just stood there, taking it all in. His simple act of kindness had created a ripple effect, touching lives in ways he never could have imagined. As he turned off the lights and locked up, Mike smiled to himself. Sometimes the biggest changes in life come from the smallest decisions. For him, it had been stopping to help a stranger on a rainy night. For his students, it had been taking a chance on this program. And now, who knew how many lives they would go on to touch? The street outside was quiet as Mike walked to his car. A light rain had started falling, just like that night a year ago. But this time, instead of fixing a broken-down car, he was helping to fix broken dreams. And somehow, that made all the difference in the world.